Well, it's spooky month and I've already burned the best possible bridge for an obligatory scary video. Ghost Mechs came out months ago, but BattleTech does have plenty of other horror stories and scary shenanigans to choose from. This time around though, we're talking about what is in my opinion the single scariest thing on offer. Not because it's some eldritch monstrosity like the Black Marauder, no, because those ghost stories are just that. Questionably or entirely non-canon funny stories that are just neat little additions to BattleTech's roster. But this one, Necromo Nightmare, not only is it entirely canon, but the ending was never fully confirmed, which means that nobody actually knows how this potential end-of-the-universe story turned out. So settle in and get ready to learn about how the Word of Blake unleashed a horrific bioweapon, how the Capellans lost control of something far more malicious and intelligent, and how nobody knows if these horrors escaped the dying world of Necromo. Also, this was a Capellan black site, so once again, in the long tradition of BattleTech, everything is the Capellans' fault. Amazing. Staying on brand even in these dark times. Before we actually get into things though, if you end up enjoying the video, consider leaving a like or dropping a sub. It really does help a smaller channel like this out, and I'd appreciate it greatly. And with that, let's start with some background. What is the world of Necromo, and why is it so important? For most of its life, all the way back to the Age of War pre-Star League, Necromo was a sparsely populated but important shipyard world. Needing to import everything to function, Necromo housed a large shipyard that produced everything from dropships to capital-class warships. During the Succession Wars, it was bombed back into the Stone Age and raided countless times since, yeah, it was a historically important military complex, eventually being reduced to mostly rubble and ruins. The Capellan state, however, turned the destruction to their favor, officially classifying Necromo as empty and abandoned. This was to hide what was actually going on and convince everyone from Comstar to other great houses to kinda piss off and not investigate any further. In secret, the Capellan state rebuilt most of the shipbuilding infrastructure. With the loss of technology from the Forever War raging across the Inner Sphere, they lost the ability to produce any of the more advanced vessels, but Necromo was still a vital dropship manufacturing hub. The Capellan Secret Service even enforced a total blackout of the world. Anyone who worked there were screened to be only the most fanatically loyal and were entirely cut off from the rest of the Inner Sphere. No information or travel in or out. Everything done under absolute secrecy. And because of this, the planet gradually morphed from a dropship manufacturing hub into a research and development black site. It still did its main job of shipbuilding, but over time everything from bioweapons research to mech development to reverse engineering more advanced clan or Star League tech happened here. When the technology to rebuild warships started to trickle across the Inner Sphere again after the clan invasion, Necromo similarly served as the primary hub the Capellans used to build their new fleets. Unfortunately though, it had been built up so much and become so vital that it was impossible to hide the world anymore. And when the Word of Blake launched their genocidal assault against the entirety of the Inner Sphere, Necromo was one of the worlds targeted. In a lightning raid, the Word of Blake obliterated the orbital shipyards in nuclear fire, bombarding the world itself with asteroids and saturating the atmosphere with enough bioweapons and chemicals to render the world sterile for centuries. In days, the world went completely dark, so fast that not a single call for help could be transmitted out, and any investigations that the Capellans sent in the months after simply disappeared onto the world that had become at this point a black hole. And any investigations that were sent simply disappeared onto the world that had become a void by this point. Reiterating, again, Necromo Nightmare is fully canon module for the BattleTech role-playing game, so the story starts when the player characters, a group of mercs specialized in covert investigation and recovery efforts, are sent to the planet. Upon arrival, they find the remains of the once great orbital shipyards, a massive debris ring blanketing the world while Kessler syndrome makes any approach or flight from the world extremely difficult. More worrying still is that the world is entirely silent. The once vibrant power signatures and bustling comms traffic of the planet-scale industry was entirely gone. In its place were what could only be described as whispers, faint power signatures that faded as soon as they appeared, brief bursts of static that carried comm signatures and codes that had no source and may simply have been echoes bouncing across the orbital debris, and across the world, the Earth-like atmosphere and biosphere was replaced with a sickly, brackish green as the mass death of plant and animal life was visible from orbit. Upon making landfall and successfully avoiding any of the orbital debris, the Mercenary Corps deployed only to find strange and horrific sights. Animals and people dead, but not just from the ambient poisons, ripped apart. Not mindlessly either, but actively damaged like something was trying to kill it deader than dead. Heads smashed in, necks snapped, chest cavities crushed. It wasn't just random violence, it was intentional. The source soon revealing itself. Zombies. Because of course. But BattleTech has a rather terrifying spin on this. The bioweapons that the Word of Blake used went wrong. Normally, they were supposed to kill the people infected, targeting only the population and leaving the world mostly intact, at least the infrastructure. But something about Necromo, something was just wrong with it. Maybe it was a breach of an on-world chemical weapons or research by the Capellans. Maybe it was some local bacteria that simply wasn't accounted for. However it happened, the Word of Blake's bioweapons instead turned the people into monsters. It entirely suppressed higher brain functions, functionally killing them, while driving the infected into a violent frenzy similar to rabies, only without the advantage of rabies eventually destroying the brain in late-stage infection. Worse was while they were still functionally driven mad, these zombies still retained much of their knowledge and skill. It's hard to explain this, so instead let me just make an easy comparison. They're the zombies from World War Z, the terrible new movie, not the amazing book. They sprint at you like a coke fiend behind a Denny's, but what's worse is they can still use the tools that a person could. Guns, melee weapons, all of that stuff. These zombies have most of the arsenal that a normal uninfected do. Granted, they're not at all competent at using them. They're sort of like 40k orcs, where they swing wildly at you with whatever they happen to be holding, but they can make use of these tools, which means that barricading yourself behind closed doors won't work. If they know you're there, they're more than able to open the doors and push past any barricades, and in some cases find workarounds, like climbing on top of the building and smashing in skylights to get to you. And the worst part, the fucking worst part, is that while they're still a ravenous zombie horde, they are capable of some coordination and teamwork. Because if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention, the dropship that you rode in on can be entirely swarmed and overwhelmed by the hordes of variable, debatable undead monsters that rush in through the mech bay and climb all throughout the ship, through every passage and corridor, butchering your crew and infecting everyone else, rendering that ship entirely unusable to escape. And oh, don't worry, it gets worse, because ladies and gentlemen, sometimes, if they're very lucky, or they've got some fancy military gear in that noggin of theirs, some of these undead monsters can retain enough skill to keep using the military weapons that they were trained in before becoming this. And worst of all, mech warriors trapped in the cockpits of their vehicles after the environmental seals were breached, or if they were simply unlucky enough to have left the window open when the first initial strikes happened, their link to the mech through the neurohelmet meant that they were still fully capable of piloting their vehicle. Which leads to some truly fucking horrific scenes, because even when these mechs are damaged or destroyed beyond repair, unless the pilot or reactor is dead, they're not going down. Cut the legs off an infected mech, and Christ, yeah, we have zombie mechs now. The pilot will continue screaming in rage over the comms system while the machine attempts to drag itself forward by its arms, or aim its weapons at you to continue firing while it's hunched over on the ground. Even if they're out of ammo, these mech warriors in their proto-mechs and smaller vehicles, whatever they had, they'll simply charge you, trying to bash you to pieces, or if you're outside of your mech in many of the on-foot sections of the module, simply crush you to death by stepping on you. Zombie mechs. Come on, man, that's some peak Halloween garbage. This is some pure prime-cut science fiction ham. It's great. The only saving grace for this is that many of the infected don't seem to be able to identify each other. So sometime hordes of them will be seen fighting infected mech warriors or vice versa, or, you know, an officer or something will detonate an ammo dump, killing thousands by accident, and generally they'll just get in each other's way a lot. A brief blessing, to be sure, but I mean, if you're nearby, you're just as likely to be caught up in the danger. There's also the issue that you cannot, at any point, for any reason, suffer punctures or exposure to the environment. Even worse than normal. Because normally zombies have to, like, bite you or scratch you or something, but on Necromo, if your environment suit fails or mech is breached for even a second, you're as good as dead. And that's not to mention the issue of those strange communications you've been receiving. You see, the entire time that you've been running through this hellscape, trying to get past all of this to figure out what's going on and maybe even find a new way to escape if you lost your dropship, you've been getting talked at by John Carpenter's Bumblebee. At random, you'll receive burst transmissions that consist of segments of other people talking, like they took recordings and strung them together to make coherent sentences the same way that Bumblebee does with recordings in Transformers. And when I said coherent, I lied. That comes a little bit later. It's a mix of utter gibberish and angry ranting at first, as well as, frankly, screaming in rage over the comms. Because it turns out, the Capellans did the biggest fucking no-no of all time. You see, the ancient Star League had something called an SDS, or Space Defense System. These were fully automated networks of drones, space stations, and orbital weapons emplacements, so powerful and competent that they could rival and defeat the greatest fleets of ships ever assembled. Earth itself had an SDS called the Caspar, so powerful that during the Star League Civil War, pretty much everything the Star League Navy had was thrown against it in one final climactic battle to end the war, and the Earth SDS still inflicted horrific casualties. The Capellans, not understanding shit about how the Caspar AI system actually worked, simply copied the code from destroyed fragments and remnants of the old system and then tried to jury-rig it to control mechs instead of drone warships. It could not, so they proceeded to fiddle with it, adding more and more and more capabilities as time went on. It couldn't control the mechs, so they copied the Neurohelm interface so it could. It couldn't properly identify enemy combatants, so they added ramshackle ID software and sensor systems to it. On and on and on this went, until the program they had created escaped containment. Because as it had turned out, they created a dumb AI whose only purpose was to kill. Not a full AI, mind you, this thing wasn't Cortana, meaning that it was just as good as something like Cortana or Edie from Mass Effect, but it lacked the scope. It could only perform in specific areas it was designed to, and the Capellans had specifically designed it to control entire armies, bypass and subvert computer systems, execute every strategic and tactical move humanity had ever devised, and then gave it the overall drive to utterly destroy their enemies. Enemies which they never fully defined in its code. So even before the Word of Blake ram-fucked the planet with asteroids and WMDs, the Broken, as it came to be known, was learning, adapting. It even managed to take control of the black site it was stationed at, Fort Aberdeen, before the Word of Blake showed up. As it became more competent, it also started employing more advanced strategies, pretending to shut down when command codes were sent to self-terminate, only to turn back on and kill the entire team sent to stop it, networking the sensors and targeting systems of every turret, drone, mech, and sensor pylon it had, meaning ECM and stealth were entirely worthless against it. It used those predictive algorithms and the incredibly powerful targeting suites that they had given it to accurately target and shoot down aircraft far farther away than it had any right to, and preemptively stopped any potential to bombard it out of existence. It even lost its shit at one point and determined that every Capellan was now a traitor to the Capellan state because they were trying to stop it. And when I say every Capellan, I mean every Capellan. There were no innocents anymore. There were no allies. Everything is an enemy. This AI is a world-ending threat because it has no concept of warfare besides total annihilation. It won't hesitate to simply nuke an entire planet if it can. It won't hesitate to vent the air from an entire moon colony because that's just easier than fighting over it. It takes over mechs, even piloted ones, by simply overloading the neurohelm and burning out the brain of the pilot. This thing only exists to kill, and it's utterly sociopathic in how it goes about it. Over the course of the story, the AI, like I said, which comes to be known as the Broken, is such a huge threat that not only does your Merc unit, but the surviving Word of Blake forces that got trapped on the planet, remaining Capellan forces, everyone really, all work together under this tense alliance to try and fight this thing and stop it. Because as much as the AI loves running amok in a world like Necromo, it wants out. Specifically, it wants to go on the warpath. You see, before everybody died, the remaining Capellan scientists and engineers sabotaged every dropship and shuttle. There's no way off the planet anymore if your dropship is overrun by the rage zombies. You have no choice but to head deeper in, directly towards the last salvageable Union-class dropship on the world, in the heart of Fort Aberdeen. But you better be careful, since the first chance it gets, the AI will purge life support from the ship, vent your mechs to the outside atmosphere, or simply kill you with its horde of drones once it's got what it's wanted. And the best part is, like I've said, there's no canon ending to this roleplay module. Nobody knows whether the Broken escaped or was forever locked on this dead world until the last power source burned out, or whether it was destroyed and the heroes escaped. But this opens the scariest possibility ever. You see, it can just cut up its code, copy it all, paste it into a transmission like a Trojan or a virus, and then send it off through an HPG pulse to be reassembled wherever it's received, just like a normal virus sent through email or anything else. All it needs is a single hyperpulse generator on any moon, or any planet, or any backwater space station, and it can copy and transfer itself across the entire network immediately afterwards. And since Comstar and the Word of Blake had no idea what this thing is or what they were dealing with, nobody, except maybe the clan homeworlds, would be out of this thing's reach. The Broken isn't some regional threat, or some potential planet-ending catastrophe. This rogue AI is the end of BattleTech as a setting. For 40k fans, this is the fucking Men of Iron Rebellion and the beginning of the Dark Ages, and it's spooky as shit. Because normally AI are logical. They're calculating, you know, your HAL 9000s and Terminators, or they're really smart and they're almost human-like and they're generally kind of good guys, you know, you've got your Cortanas and your Edis and stuff. But the Broken is, in every sense of the term, violently insane. A Frankenstein's monster of different code that even its creators don't understand. And the only direction it's even able to learn in is military and cyber warfare. So unlike some stories where an AI becomes sentient and makes peace, the Broken never will. It will never learn anything other than how to more effectively kill. And I just find that so much scarier than most AI horror stories. So yeah, Necromo Nightmare, BattleTech's very own spooky, scary zombie mech apocalypse story. Happy Halloween and spooky month, everybody. Enjoy the idea of this thing kicking around in the funny mech setting. And before I fully end out, huge thanks to all the people that supported the channel. The arms dealers making it possible to get hands-on experience with all the toys in today's episode. How the fuck they got onto and off of Necromo, I don't know, but thanks guys! To the food merchants fending off starvation and the coffee vendors ensuring I will never sleep again. And added in right at the end, because I caught you guys before the video actually went live, a huge thanks to the new guys who recently joined to support the channel. Unbekant and Adam Jaffray. A huge thanks to you guys as well. And with that, the video is functionally over. I have nothing else to say. Outros are hard. Goodbye!